The galaxy laughed at humanity, thinking they were weak and reckless. Then the Terran Hurricane-Class Battleship appeared, massive and silent. No shots were fired, no weapons unleashed. Yet enemy fleets drifted, systems failed, and surrender came without a fight. Humans didn't seek war or glory. They showed true power lies in control, preparation, and inevitability. When the hurricane arrived, the galaxy learned the hard way that underestimating Earth was the biggest mistake they could make. Across the galaxy, Earth was talked about more than it was respected. To most advanced civilizations, humanity was noisy, emotional, and permanently divided. Terrans argued openly, disagreed loudly, and broadcast their conflicts for anyone to see. Alien analysts watching human media believed this behavior showed weakness rather than honesty. Human politics confused the galaxy. Different nations, different alliances, different arguments, all happening at the same time. To outsiders, it looked chaotic and inefficient. They assumed a species that could not fully agree with itself could never act together when it truly mattered. Military observers paid close attention to Earth's fleets. On paper, Terran ships looked average. They were not the largest, not the fastest, and not the most heavily armed compared to older empires. Human technology advanced quickly but unevenly, with brilliant breakthroughs followed by long periods of refinement. The galaxy preferred clean, predictable progress, not sudden leaps born from desperation and creativity. Terrans were also known for taking risks that no other species would consider reasonable. They tested experimental drives near populated systems. They deployed prototypes into live combat scenarios. To most alien commanders, this was reckless behavior, not bravery. Humans accepted losses openly and studied failure without shame, something the galaxy misunderstood deeply. Culturally, Earth was labeled as unstable. Humans formed strong emotional bonds, then fought brutally when those bonds were threatened. They mourned their dead publicly and remembered defeats longer than victories. Alien psychologists believed this emotional depth made Terrans predictable and easy to manipulate. They were wrong, but they did not know it yet. The Galactic Council officially classified Earth as a low-priority emerging power. This label shaped how others treated humanity. Trade agreements favored older species. Terran warnings were acknowledged politely, then ignored. Human objections were recorded, archived, and forgotten. Some empires openly mocked Terran diplomacy. They joked that humans talked too much and acted too late. That Earth would always argue while stronger species made decisions. These jokes spread through military academies and council chambers alike, reinforcing a dangerous assumption. What the galaxy failed to notice was how humans learned. Every conflict, every loss, every betrayal was recorded, studied, and remembered. Terrans did not forget insults easily, but they also did not rush to respond. They waited, adjusted, and prepared quietly. Earth's true strength was hidden behind its noise. While aliens saw chaos, humans saw choice. While others valued rigid hierarchy, Terrans valued adaptability. Different nations argued, but when an external threat crossed the line, unity came faster than anyone expected. Human engineers worked with one unspoken principle. If something could break, it eventually would. So they designed systems that could keep working even when partially destroyed. They planned not for perfect conditions, but for worst possible scenarios. Terran commanders trained for failure, not victory. They assumed communication would be lost, allies would hesitate, and plans would collapse. What remained after everything went wrong was what they trusted most. This mindset made their doctrines look strange and inefficient to outsiders. The galaxy believed Earth was decades away from relevance. Some thought centuries. They assumed humans would remain a minor regional power, protected by distance and ignored by giants. Earth's reputation became a shield that hid its preparation. By the time the galaxy began paying attention, humanity had already decided where its lines were drawn. And more importantly, what would happen when those lines were crossed? The first move against humanity did not begin with a declaration of war. It began quietly, the way most disasters do. A distant border system, lightly populated and far from Earth's core worlds, suddenly went dark. That system was not important to the galaxy. It held no rare resources, no ancient relics, no strategic hyperspace lanes. Its only value was symbolic. It was under Terran protection. An alien coalition, confident and experienced, chose it as a test. They believed humans would protest loudly and then retreat. Their fleets arrived without warning and targeted civilian infrastructure first. Orbital stations were disabled, supply ships destroyed, and communication arrays shattered. From their point of view, this was standard procedure. Demonstrate dominance, cause fear, and force negotiations on favorable terms. They assumed Earth would prioritize survival over pride. They had done this to smaller species many times before. On Earth, the news spread fast. Footage of damaged stations and drifting civilian transports reached every major network. Human reactions were emotional and loud, just as the galaxy expected. Debates erupted, protests formed, and politicians argued publicly. Alien observers watching human media felt reassured. They saw anger, grief, and confusion. To them, it looked like panic. They mistook public emotion for strategic weakness. Behind closed doors, something else was happening. Terran military command did not rush forces forward. They did not threaten retaliation or issue dramatic speeches. They gathered data quietly and confirmed one thing: the coalition had crossed a line that had been set long ago. Instead of mobilizing fleets, Earth sent a message. One message, transmitted through official Galactic Council channels. It was short, calm, and precise. The message stated that the attack violated Terran protection agreements. It demanded immediate withdrawal and reparations, and it warned that further action would result in consequences. There was no emotional language, no threats, no mention of weapons or retaliation, just a clear statement of cause and effect. The response from the coalition was laughter. Council representatives openly mocked the warning. They pointed out Earth's average military ranking. They joked about Terrans being overly dramatic again. Some even suggested the message was written to save face, a way for humans to look strong while preparing to back down. Military analysts across the galaxy agreed. They believed Earth would never escalate alone against an established power bloc. Encouraged by the lack of immediate response, the coalition pushed further. Additional ships entered the system. Salvage crews began stripping damaged stations. Civilian survivors were detained under the excuse of security. Each action was deliberate. They wanted to provoke a louder reaction, something they could frame as Terran aggression. But Earth remained silent. That silence made some observers uneasy. Experienced commanders knew loud species usually stayed loud, but their concerns were dismissed. The coalition leadership was confident they controlled the situation. Within Terran space, evacuation orders were issued quietly. Trade routes shifted, fleets repositioned without fanfare. No announcements were made to the public. Human media continued arguing, unaware that decisions had already been finalized. The coalition believed they were winning without resistance. They believed Earth was hesitating, calculating political costs. They did not understand that the warning had never been a negotiation. For humanity, the message was not sent to change the enemy's mind. It was sent to establish record and responsibility, to mark the moment when restraint ended and response became justified. By ignoring it, the coalition confirmed every assumption Terran planners had made, that the galaxy would not take humans seriously until forced to, that reputation alone would never protect their people. When the last civilian transport was seized, when the final warning went unanswered, Earth stopped asking the galaxy to listen. The provocation was complete, and the response that followed would not be loud. It would be undeniable. Long-range sensors across multiple sectors detected something unusual at the same moment. It was not an explosion, not a fleet jump, not a weapon discharge. It was a distortion, a slow and heavy pressure moving through space. At first, automated systems flagged it as a sensor error. Space occasionally produced strange readings, and most were harmless. But this signal did not fade. It grew clearer with every passing minute. Navigation beacons began reporting gravitational instability. Trade ships altered course without understanding why. Even empty space seemed to resist movement in one specific direction. That direction pointed toward the contested border system. Military scanners tried to classify the object. They failed repeatedly. The mass reading was wrong, the energy profile unfamiliar. No known ship class matched the data. As the object moved closer, more sensors locked on. Different species, different technologies, all seeing the same impossible thing. A single structure, vast beyond reason, traveling without haste. It did not hide, accelerate, or maneuver defensively. Commanders expected escorts to appear. Destroyers, carriers, support fleets, anything. But there was nothing else, just one ship, moving alone, that unsettled experienced officers more than a full invasion force ever could. No empire sent a lone vessel into hostile space without absolute confidence. Either it was a bluff, or it was something far worse. As identification systems refined their scans, a partial registry code appeared. It was Terran. That alone caused confusion. Human ships did not produce signatures like this. Older officers dismissed it immediately. They argued Earth lacked the resources to build something so massive. Others suggested it was an experimental station or construction platform. No one wanted to believe it was a warship. Then the name resolved fully: Hurricane. The word spread through command channels quickly. Analysts searched Terran databases and found almost nothing. No public records, no trade references, no leaked schematics. It was as if the ship had never existed until that moment. The Hurricane did not enter the system with dramatic speed. It did not announce itself. It simply arrived at the edge of contested space and stopped, as if waiting. Enemy fleets scrambled into formation, weapons powered up, targeting systems locked. Orders were shouted and relayed across dozens of ships. Yet no one fired. Something about the Hurricane made every commander hesitate. Its surface was smooth and unbroken, no visible weapon ports, no exposed engines, just layered armor and deep structural lines that suggested unimaginable internal mass. Sensors revealed something even more disturbing. The ship was not actively shielding itself. Instead, it was stabilizing local space around it, reducing turbulence, flattening gravity waves. This was not a defensive posture. It was preparation. Observers from the Galactic Council joined the feeds. They laughed at first. A single Terran ship facing an entire coalition fleet. The situation looked absurd on paper, but laughter faded as calculations updated. The Hurricane's energy reserves exceeded those of entire fleets. Its reactor output was not spiking or fluctuating. It was steady, controlled, patient. The ship made no threats. It transmitted no demands. It did not respond to hails. It simply remained there. Then something changed, not in the Hurricane, but in space itself. Micro-distortions spread outward from the ship, barely detectable at first. Formation spacing between coalition vessels began to drift. Thrusters compensated, then overcorrected. Navigation computers reported conflicting data. Distance measurements stopped agreeing with visual range. Time synchronization across fleets began to slip by milliseconds, then seconds. Still, the Hurricane did nothing aggressive. No weapons charged, no engines flared. It was as if the ship was allowing everyone to feel its presence fully. At that moment, some commanders understood the truth. This was not a ship rushing to battle. It was a boundary, a statement made of metal and physics. The Hurricane had arrived not to chase or threaten, but to exist where it chose and force the universe around it to adjust. For the first time, the galaxy felt uncertainty, not as fear, but as inevitability. The moment the Hurricane appeared on shared sensor networks, the Galactic Council called an emergency session. Delegates were pulled from rest cycles, negotiations were paused, and private disputes were forgotten. Every major power wanted to see the same thing with their own eyes. The first images projected into the council chamber caused confusion rather than fear. The ship looked wrong. Not aggressive, not elegant, not familiar. It was simply enormous and calm. Military representatives began speaking over one another. Some claimed the sensor data was exaggerated. Others insisted Terran systems were malfunctioning or intentionally falsified. No one wanted to accept that a species ranked so low had produced something so large. Analysts started breaking down the numbers. Mass estimates were revised again and again, each time increasing. Energy readings were cross-checked across independent networks. Every confirmation made the room quieter. Laughter followed as a defense mechanism. One delegate joked that humans had finally built a monument to their ego. Another suggested it was an empty shell meant to scare weaker fleets. Several council members nodded, relieved to cling to familiar assumptions. Then a quiet voice from a neutral observer species asked a simple question. Why would Terrans send it alone? That question lingered. No escort ships, no carriers, no visible support vessels. Older empires never deployed single assets without layers of protection. Doing so invited disaster, unless disaster was impossible. Attention shifted to the Hurricane's behavior. It was not powering weapons. It was not raising shields. It was not maneuvering to gain advantage. Instead, it was adjusting space. Council scientists noticed localized gravity stabilization fields expanding outward. These fields were not defensive in the traditional sense. They were structural, like foundations being laid. As this became clear, the tone of the chamber changed. Mockery gave way to analysis. Analysis gave way to unease. One by one, representatives realized the ship was not preparing to fight. It was preparing the environment, as if combat was secondary to something much larger. Projections showed how coalition fleets were slowly drifting out of optimal formation, not due to attack, but due to subtle changes in space curvature. Thrusters burned fuel just to remain where they were. Council tacticians whispered calculations to their aides. If the ship was doing this passively, what would happen if it focused? The idea that a vessel could dominate a battle space without firing unsettled even the most aggressive species. Wars were understood through force, speed, and numbers, not inevitability. Some delegates demanded immediate condemnation of Earth. They argued this was an escalation beyond acceptable norms. Others hesitated, pointing out that no weapon had been used. No shots fired meant no clear violation. That legal uncertainty frustrated the chamber. Terrans had always been good at rules. Now it seemed they had built something that lived between them. Council historians searched Terran records. They found old human sayings, concepts about deterrence, presence, and lines not meant to be crossed, ideas dismissed as primitive philosophy rather than strategic doctrine. Meanwhile, real-time feeds showed the hurricane remaining completely silent. No demands were issued. No justification offered. The ship simply existed, unmovable and unhurried. That silence carried weight. It forced the council to speak among themselves without guidance, without threats to react against, without negotiation hooks to grab onto. Several veteran diplomats realized something uncomfortable. Humans were not asking for permission. They were demonstrating capacity. As minutes passed, the council chamber grew tense. Representatives stopped posturing and began worrying about precedent. If Earth could do this, what else had they built quietly, protected by underestimation? A motion was raised to downgrade the coalition's authority in the contested system. It stalled, blocked by political alliances. The council argued while space itself bent under Terran control. In that delay, a realization spread. The hurricane was not there for the council, not there for debate, not there for approval. It was there to mark a boundary the galaxy had ignored, and to show that Earth no longer needed recognition to enforce it. By the time the emergency session adjourned without resolution, one truth was clear to every species present. The age of treating humanity as background noise had ended. The council had watched history arrive, and done nothing to stop it. Nothing announced the beginning of the demonstration. There was no warning tone, no weapon charge glow, no sudden movement from the hurricane. For several long seconds, space looked exactly the same. Then physics stopped behaving the way everyone expected. Sensors across the coalition fleet began reporting minor errors. Distances were off by small margins. Timestamps no longer matched between ships. At first, crews assumed calibration faults. Engineers reset systems. Commanders ordered diagnostic checks. But the errors did not disappear. They spread, slowly and evenly, like pressure under deep water. The hurricane had activated its primary system. Not a weapon, not a shield, a field. Instead of releasing energy outward, the ship drew rules inward. Local space began to bend toward stability, defined by Terran mathematics. Gravity wells smoothed, then reshaped. Momentum no longer behaved naturally. Enemy ships felt it first through movement. Thrusters fired at standard output, but acceleration lagged. Course corrections overshot their targets. Formation spacing drifted despite constant adjustment. Pilots fought their controls. Navigation officers shouted conflicting numbers. Computers insisted ships were stationary while visual feeds showed slow rotation. The fleet was not under attack. It was being unmade as a system. Still, no shots were fired. Then internal failures began. Not explosions, not dramatic breaches, small things. Power relays tripped without overload. Cooling systems failed while temperatures remained normal. Artificial gravity fluctuated just enough to disorient crews. Crew members stumbled, misjudged steps, dropped tools. The hurricane did not target individual ships. It did not single out leaders or flagships. Its effect was universal and equal. Every vessel within range was subject to the same quiet dominance. Commanders ordered weapons hot. Targeting solutions failed to lock. Fire control systems reported valid trajectories that curved away at the last moment. Missile guidance refused to stabilize. Beam weapons scattered as if space itself rejected precision. Fear began to spread. Not the panic of incoming fire, but the dread of helplessness. Veteran officers recognized the truth too late. They were inside a controlled environment, a battle space owned completely by the Hurricane. As minutes passed, ships began colliding, not violently, slowly, like drifting debris pulled by invisible tides. Hull plating scraped, antenna arrays snapped. One cruiser lost orientation entirely and rolled until emergency clamps locked it in place. Another vessel's reactor shut down automatically, interpreting the altered physics as catastrophic failure. Across the fleet, alarms sounded constantly, but no two ships reported the same emergency. Command cohesion collapsed under informational chaos. Still, the Hurricane remained silent. Observers watching from distant systems struggled to understand what they were seeing. There was no exchange of fire, no clear enemy action to record. Yet the coalition fleet was coming apart. Then the Terran transmission arrived. One message. Short, calm, and perfectly timed. It explained nothing technical. It stated no demands. It said only that the current conditions would remain until all hostile forces withdrew and released detained civilians. There was no threat attached, no countdown, no escalation warning. The implication was clear. This was the gentle version. Coalition commanders attempted a coordinated retreat. The order spread slowly through disrupted channels. Ships tried to turn. Many could not. Those that managed to align for jump found their drives refusing to synchronize. Hyperspace calculations failed repeatedly. The Hurricane was not blocking escape. It was simply making complexity impossible. One by one, ships powered down weapons, then engines, then non-essential systems. Surrender followed without ceremony. Escape pods launched not from destroyed ships, but from crews unwilling to remain inside machines that no longer obeyed reality. Throughout it all, the Hurricane never advanced. Never pursued, never reacted. When the last coalition vessel transmitted surrender, the field relaxed, space returned to normal behavior, systems stabilized as if waking from a shared nightmare. Only then did crews understand the scale of what had happened. They had not been defeated by force, they had been overridden. The Hurricane had not destroyed a fleet. It had demonstrated that resistance itself was optional. The galaxy learned a new meaning of power that day. Power that did not shout. Power that did not chase. Power that simply decided how things would work. When the surrender transmissions finally stopped, silence fell over the coalition fleet. No one spoke. No one moved. The realization of what had occurred was slow. Every officer and crew member understood that the Hurricane had rewritten the rules of engagement without firing a single shot. Terran commanders finally communicated directly. Their message was calm, precise, and almost casual. They explained the philosophy behind the Hurricane-Class Battleship. Humans did not rely on overwhelming numbers. They did not depend on sheer speed or the largest arsenal. They depended on inevitability. They built systems and strategies so complete that resistance became futile. Every step the enemy might take had already been calculated, accounted for, and neutralized. The explanation did not include boasts or threats. It was matter of fact, almost instructional. Terrans emphasized that their goal was not to kill, not to dominate out of malice, but to enforce deterrence so absolute that conflict could be avoided in the future. Analysts in the coalition tried to process what they were hearing. The Hurricane had not been built to fight in the conventional sense. It had been designed to end wars before they began, by shaping the environment itself, by forcing physics to obey strategic design. The Council historians scrambled to correlate Terran doctrines with their own understanding. They found ancient references to humans thinking in terms of boundaries, lines that should never be crossed, consequences that should be certain, actions that were measured, deliberate, and final. It became clear that every reckless act humans were accused of in history had a method. Every apparent error, every risk taken, every failure observed by outsiders had been part of preparation. The galaxy had underestimated not just human technology, but human patience, observation, and planning. Across the surrendered fleets, crews listened and tried to adjust their thinking. They understood that the Hurricane did not need to fire to win. It simply existed in a way that made their own systems fail. It demonstrated that Terrans were never acting out of impulse. Every motion was intentional, every field calculated, every pause deliberate. One officer whispered to his aide that this was not just strategy, it was philosophy made tangible. A doctrine of absolute deterrence, the kind of doctrine that demanded respect, even terror. The Council debated whether to classify Earth as a threat or a new apex power. Before, humanity had been labeled low priority, emerging, inconsequential. Now, the classification seemed absurd. A species that could produce a ship like the Hurricane could not be ignored. Meanwhile, Terran commanders remained silent. They did not celebrate. They did not gloat. They returned to standard patrol routines as if nothing unusual had happened. That calm reinforced their message. Observers across the galaxy recorded every transmission. They studied the physics of the field, the reactions of every fleet, every malfunction, every drift, every subtle disruption. All of it confirmed a single principle. Humans did not need to destroy to control. They needed only to exist strategically. And that existence alone made negotiation unnecessary. The surrendering fleets began to appreciate what had prevented catastrophe. Had the Hurricane attacked conventionally, millions might have died. But by demonstrating inevitability, humans enforced their boundaries without unnecessary loss. A lesson that no one in the galaxy would forget. For Terran planners, this was only a demonstration. The message was clear to themselves as well as the galaxy. Prepare for the worst. Act only when necessary. Let deterrence speak louder than violence. By the end of the day, scholars, tacticians, and politicians alike had one thought in common. The Hurricane had revealed that power was not measured by guns, fleets, or missiles. Power was measured by control, preparation, and the ability to make resistance meaningless. And in that realization, every species understood why the galaxy had misjudged humanity for so long. Humans had waited, learned, observed, and then shown that the line between chaos and order was theirs to define. When Terrans finally acted, it was not rage, it was inevitability. The surviving alien vessels began transmitting surrender one by one. There was no negotiation, no conditions, no attempt to bargain. Crew members of each ship simply followed protocol and accepted the impossibility of resisting. Across the galaxy, military commanders watched the transmissions in disbelief. Years of experience had taught them that no single ship could enforce surrender without extreme firepower. Yet here it was. One Terran ship had achieved the impossible. The Galactic Council began reclassifying Earth in real time. Documents that once labeled humanity as emerging and low priority were replaced with terms like strategic apex species and deterrence authority. Political analysts scrambled to understand the implications. This was not just a lesson in military power, it was a lesson in influence, reputation, and inevitability. Historians of alien civilizations reviewed past interactions with Earth. They realized that every perceived weakness had been misinterpreted. Humanity's loud debates, emotional displays, and apparent chaos had hidden careful observation, learning, and preparation. Every risk taken, every prototype tested, every minor battle lost was part of a larger plan. The Hurricane-Class Battleship returned to Terran space without ceremony. No parades, no public celebrations. Earth did not need recognition. The message had already been delivered, and the galaxy had learned it well. Diplomatic channels remained silent for hours. Other species debated in private, trying to decide whether Earth would now act aggressively. Some feared retaliation. Some feared deception. Few considered that humans were only protecting themselves and their interests, not seeking conquest or domination. Alien fleets that had survived the demonstration conducted full repairs. Engineers meticulously inspected hulls, power systems, and navigational controls. They discovered the subtle influence of the Hurricane class had caused cascading microfailures in almost every system. No ship had been destroyed, but the lesson had been enforced perfectly. Galactic militaries began rewriting doctrines overnight. They realized that sheer numbers, overwhelming firepower, and tactical maneuvers could be rendered irrelevant by a single, well-designed system. The Hurricane had introduced a concept no one had taken seriously before: power without violence, control without conflict. Council meetings that had previously been dominated by protocol and ego became tense and cautious. Earth was no longer a background actor. It was now a standard by which other species measured possibility, a yardstick of both caution and respect. Within Terran Command, there was quiet satisfaction, but no celebration. The planners knew this demonstration was only the beginning. It had set the tone for how humanity would be treated across the galaxy. Every fleet, every diplomat, every observer had learned that Terrans did not bluff. They acted only when necessary, and always with precision. For the galaxy, the lesson lingered. Underestimate humans at your own risk. The Hurricane had not attacked, yet every alien commander knew the full scale of Terran capability. It was not a threat made of explosions or firepower. It was a threat made of inevitability and certainty, one that could not be bargained with, ignored, or dismissed. The Council formally amended its records to reflect the new reality. Earth's reputation shifted instantly. Every species in contact with Terrans now approached negotiations differently. Caution replaced arrogance, and respect replaced mockery. Even private discussions among alien soldiers and pilots carried a new tone. Stories of the Hurricane-Class spread like a cautionary legend. Tales described not destruction, but the calm, quiet inevitability of Terran strategy. The galaxy collectively understood that when humans acted, it was final. The surrendering fleets returned to home stations under escort. They were humiliated but alive. The demonstration had preserved life while teaching an unforgettable lesson. Every crew member who had witnessed it would carry the knowledge forward for decades. Earth remained quiet. No celebrations, no announcements, no propaganda. The Hurricane-Class Battleship had delivered its message without a word of triumph. And in that silence, the galaxy understood everything it needed to know. The lesson was clear. Humans do not seek conquest. They seek deterrence, stability, and security. And when Terrans finally arrive in force, it is not out of desire or anger. It is because every other option has already failed. The galaxy had learned the hard way, and it would not make the same mistake twice. The Hurricane-Class Battleship returned to Terran space without fanfare. No cheering crowds, no grand speeches, no parades. It slipped through the void as quietly as it had arrived, its mission complete, its message delivered. For the surviving alien fleets, the lesson remained vivid. They had been defeated without a single shot fired. Ships had not exploded, crews had not died. Yet the psychological impact was total. Every commander, every tactician, every soldier remembered the inevitability of the Hurricane's presence. Across the Galactic Council, analysts continued to review every transmission, every sensor reading, every micro-failure of systems caused by the ship's subtle manipulations. They studied the patterns of gravitational stabilization, the cascading errors in navigation, the slow drift of fleets unable to maintain formation. Reports filled hundreds of pages, yet each ended with the same conclusion. Humans had acted in a way the galaxy could not anticipate, understand, or counter. Terran leadership did not issue a statement. There was no boasting, no public claim of victory. The ship had performed its duty perfectly. Its silence spoke louder than any declaration could. It told the galaxy that Earth did not seek glory. It sought only deterrence and protection. In the weeks that followed, entire military doctrines across alien civilizations were rewritten. Tactics and strategies that had been reliable for centuries were reconsidered. Commanders debated how to avoid such situations in the future. All realized that conventional superiority was meaningless against inevitability. Historians analyzed humanity's past interactions. They discovered that every argument, every perceived mistake, every seeming impulsive act had a purpose. Humans had always learned from failure. They adapted, observed, and prepared for outcomes that others considered impossible. The Hurricane-Class Battleship was the culmination of centuries of planning and adaptation. Alien scholars began to revise their understanding of power. It was no longer measured only in firepower, numbers, or territory. Power could also be measured in control, precision, and the ability to make resistance irrelevant. The galaxy began to see that humans had mastered this form of power. And that mastery had been underestimated at every turn. For Terran commanders, the return to home space was quiet and orderly. No one celebrated. No one boasted. It was a mission executed with discipline and efficiency. They had made a statement, enforced boundaries, and ensured safety without unnecessary destruction. And that was all that mattered. Across the galaxy, alien diplomats approached negotiations with a new level of caution. They had learned to treat every warning from Earth seriously. Every message, every demonstration, Every show of presence carried weight. Humans no longer had to threaten openly. Their capacity for inevitability was understood and respected. Even private fleets recounted the story of the Hurricane-Class battleship with reverence and awe. Pilots described the slow, almost peaceful way it arrived, the subtle influence it exerted over space, the quiet but total control it demonstrated. It became a legend of restraint, intelligence, and absolute deterrence. No one dared underestimate humanity again. The galaxy realized that humans did not act impulsively. They did not act violently without reason. But when they chose to act, it was with precision, inevitability, and finality. In the hearts of every commander who had witnessed the events, there remained a humbling truth. Earth's approach was not about destruction. It was about control, deterrence, and survival. And that form of power, they understood, was far more effective than any fleet, weapon, or alliance. Humans returned to their worlds quietly. The Hurricane-Class remained a silent guardian. Its presence ensured that the galaxy remembered the lesson. Underestimate humans at your peril. Respect their boundaries, heed their warnings, and never mistake their patience for weakness. The galaxy had learned the hard way. The lesson would not be forgotten, and the memory of the Hurricane-Class battleship's silent demonstration would shape interstellar relations for generations. Every species understood, in the simplest and most unavoidable terms, that when humans finally moved, every other option had already failed. And that was a truth that no one could ignore.